You got an email from me, right?
An email for you?
From me?
From you?
Yeah.
About
It's got your grades, your 2 test grades, your average grade, and it said, hey, on April
first.
1st? Oh, yeah. April
Can you
Fool's Day.
split?
On April 1st, I'm offering a retest. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm willing to, so details about that, you can't do worse. And I'm willing to replace both grades. You get an A, you get an A. I'm gonna sample basically from the whole thing, from the whole first 2 tests. All right. Well, let's pray and let's get started. Father, thank you for grace. Thank you for grace that we have in your Son, Lord, and the opportunity to come to you and to know you, Lord. If you didn't come to us, we couldn't know you. We could never approach you. Father, you've revealed yourself in all of creation. That's even so much of what this class is about, is, Lord, we seek to see your glory and your wisdom and your power in all that you've made, to have awe and wonder of you. Father, help us as we're here. Help me to be clear and concise and to connect, and help us as students to understand these things and ask questions about what we don't. Lord, give us a deep interest in the world that you've made. Pray for Thompson as he's away at tennis. Lord, give him success. Lord, we pray for our students here as they think about their future and where they may land. Lord, would you open the right doors for them? Father, as they seek you and trust you, may they find that you set their path very straight. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay. Well, I just want to review where we've been again and where we're at to see where we're, kind of where we're going. So we got all of life, right? All of life gets divided into 2 camps. What are they? Prokaryotic and eukaryotic. And the prokaryotic is divided into archaea and bacteria. Okay, good. U gets divided into animals, plants, I heard protists and fungi. Okay, good. Okay, very good. Now, we've been dealing with plants, and under plants, we divided right away into 2 groups. What were they? No, ma'am.
Vascular and non-vascular.
Vascular and non-vascular. Okay. Non-vascular broke down into 3. We weren't worried about all that. We did say, hey, you need to know bryophytes, right? What are bryophytes? Does it make you know bryophytes? Probably didn't make you know that name, did I? I made you know one under the vascular. You learned mosses, right? Okay. That was enough for now. And then under vascular, we broke down right away into, I already heard it, seedless and seeded, right? So we had seedless, seeded. And there are a lot of seedless vascular plants, but we didn't worry about all of them. We learned one of them, right? We learned Pterophyta. Do you remember what that is?
Terrible plant. No.
You're thinking right in that you're thinking about these prefixes, but dino is the one that means terrible, like Dinoflagellata. Ptero is like a certain dinosaur, right? Yeah, what do birds have?
Wings.
Wings, winged plant, right? And so this refers to the ferns as they open up their, looks like wings coming out. Okay. And then we go to the seeded. This is going to break down into 2 groups. Gymnosperms and angiosperms. One of the the keys, just as a student, when you get a chart like this and somebody makes clear, like, hey, you have to know this, one of the keys is just to do it. Just to, from memory, draw it. And then take a look and compare it to your notes. And go, okay, well, I've got this, or I don't have this, or here's what I, and then you practice. And just to do it over and over again, drill it, basically, until it's there. By the end of the year, you know, you've got to have all this. This won't go away. Okay, I'm going to keep, we're never going to stop talking about archaea and bacteria. We're trying to look at the fullness of life and the variety and all the amazing things God's made. So, this word keeps coming up. And it's very important. What does vascular mean? What does vascular tissue do? Transports, right? It can transport water, can transport nutrient or sugars and things, right? What tissue transports water up? Who knows what you said?
Xylem.
Xylem. And what transports sugars down? Phloem. Where will I find xylem in a plant? Inside. And phloem then will be outside. Which one produces bark?
The outside one.
Even if you didn't know that phloem produced bark, you could back your way into that by knowing xylem's on the inside, phloem's on the outside, bark's outside the phloem, therefore phloem has to be the one that produces bark, right? Does that make sense? Okay. When it's mature, is xylem dead or alive? Say dead.
Yeah.
Dead. Mature xylem is dead. There's we'll talk about this coming up. There's a, if I were to look at a tree, okay? We're kind of stepping away from this for just a second. We're focusing on this vascular idea. If I were to look at a tree here, okay? And I go, all right, here's this. And here is bark. Okay, here's my phloem. I've got this other layer that's just fascinating. It's right here. This is where all your growth happens. This is the part of the tree that's growing each and every year. Okay, so we've drawn a couple things here. Let's label. You're going to want this, by the way. So here's bark. Here is phloem. Here is xylem. And then there's this green layer. And I'm not drawing it green because it's actually green, although actually part of it might be green, but just because I just need to color code some things. So I'm going to help you reason your way into what's going on in the green layer, okay? Just based on things you already know. So when you do a cross section like a tree stump, what do you see in there?
Rings.
You see rings. And these are fascinating. You can study these. You can figure out what are the rings that. Huh?
You can figure out the age of the tree.
You figure out the age of the tree. Why is that?
Because every season that the tree is doing photosynthesis, it grows a little bit more.
One new ring, right? Where's the new ring?
Out.
Outermost. So it produces it one ring at a time.
Yeah.
So whatever's making it has to keep going
Outside.
out, right? So this is my oldest. This is my youngest. Okay? So it just keeps kind of getting pushed out. That's good. So we know actually already something about this green. I'm not telling you its name yet, but we know something about what it does. Every year it makes one new layer of xylem. My bark is not alive. Okay, my bark is dead. It was once alive. It was once part of things that were going on and were living. What made my bark? It's very gentle, but it's also a lot. What was the question I just asked you before I got distracted?
Something about bark.
What makes
Yeah, what makes the bark?
Mhm.
It's got to be the phloem. The xylem stuff's happening in here. The phloem stuff's happening here, and the bark's outside of that. So, and think about it, the tree's getting bigger every year, right? So I got to keep producing bark, right? Otherwise, the old bark's just going to crack and fall off, and right? So this dead stuff out here keeps getting produced every year and it keeps getting pushed out, right? My phloem, if it can't reproduce it in some way every single year, it's going to crack and fall apart, right? But it doesn't. So new xylem is made to the inside, new phloem is made to the outside. Okay. The oldest xylem is deep inside. The oldest phloem is furthest outside. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. This is called a vascular cambium. Okay. Produces one new layer of xylem each year to the inside. And it makes one new layer of phloem per year to the outside. Your only living xylem generally is found in your vascular cambium. It has the cells to make new xylem. It reproduces itself, makes new xylem. The stuff that's on the inside is going to die. It needs to die. Xylem is essentially like a straw that water is, we've talked about root pressure, we've talked about transpiration, we've talked about capillary action. Because they're dead, hollow cells, that water is able to just kind of flow up through them. But they really need to be dead for that to happen, okay? Okay, so one new layer every year and it's going to quickly die. But something's still got to be alive to make the new stuff for next year. And that stuff is in the vascular cambium. You need to produce more, you need your phloem to be living and active and all that kind of stuff. And as we get bigger and bigger and bigger, we need to reproduce it. And what if a bug gets in there and eats us? And what if a woodpecker's, pecking at us to get at the bug? And what if a big buck comes along and he's scratching his horns against us and destroying the bark and getting in and killing? And what if all this stuff, you don't just want to die, you got to be able to make new cells, right? You got to be able to recover and heal. And so that's, the vascular cambium is able to do that. It's able to grow and reproduce. It is found between the xylem and the phloem. I want to just recap what it's actually doing. Put your hands together. Hands together. Come on. Okay. This side is the inside of the tree. This side's the outside of the tree. Ready? Hands together. This is your vascular cambium.
So to this side, it's making
Xylem,
xylem, which is going to push your hands,
that one.
right? And to this side, it's making
Phloem.
phloem, right? So as the tree goes, it's going like this, right? It's just continually producing like that. Does that make any sense? Well, that probably wasn't the best example, but
It's getting fatter.
are you, yes it does. Are you familiar with seafloor vents? Or the Marianas Trench, or sea ridges? So there's a place where you have a divergent boundaries in the ocean, okay? And so lava is, so you know, or magma is coming up, and then it's becoming lava, and then it's cooling. And the tectonic plates are pulling apart, right? Like this. Well, it's forming new tectonic plate right there where the stuff's cooling. It's constantly, the floors at this place of the ocean are constantly going out like this, right? And so you've got new plate happening here, and you've got new plate happening here. This is happening at every divergent boundary. It's a little bit like this. Your vascular cambium is making new xylem to this side and new phloem to this side, and constantly just producing like that, okay? One layer at a time. How many layers per year? One, right? One new ring here, right? One new layer of phloem that's going to become, old phloem is going to become bark, and it's going to protect this out here, okay? This is called a vascular cambium. Where will I find living xylem in a tree? Inside. Where will I find a tree actively growing? No, not inside. Where will I find my only living xylem in a tree?
Between the phloem and the xylem, and the dead xylem, the vascular
In
cambium.
the vascular cambium. Where will a tree actively grow?
The vascular
The vascular cambium. Okay. Questions on that? No? Okay. That's as far as horizontal growth, getting thicker, right? Because we know, you look at a tree, every year it gets a little thicker and it gets a little taller, right? Let's talk about the taller part. This is another thing you need to know about. I'm going to erase this. There's more than one type of what I'm about to describe to you, but right now we're only worried about one. It's called an apical meristem. Apical refers to like an apex, which means like the tip at the edge of the farthermost part, okay? So you think about a tree branch, every year it grows a little bit further out. It's you know, that makes sense, right? Well, it has an apical meristem that is doing that. It's constantly doing the same thing that the vascular cambium was doing. It's putting new cells and pushing itself kind of out, like a little bit at a time, year by year by year. Does that make sense? Now, the thing is, if I cut this off, it will not grow that direction anymore. We call this topping. So if you've got a tree, and like a fruit tree or something like that, and it's starting to get really tall, and it's not producing much fruit, and boy, it'd be really good if it would grow out laterally, right? Because I don't want all my fruit up high where I can't reach it and just the birds get it. I actually need, so what you do is you top it. You cut off the tips of the branches at the top. It literally cannot grow that direction anymore because it has to have an apical meristem. It can only grow where there is an apical meristem. And so it'll stop growing there, and now it'll start growing out more. That make sense?
Mm-hmm.
I want to give you an analogy to what this is like. Have you heard of germ cells? Okay. So an apical meristem is more or less the germ cells in vascular plants. sit down for a second. You have different cells in different portions of your body that do different things. They all have the same DNA. They all contain the information to do everything. So I want you to think about this. You've got cells in your stomach that produce hydrochloric acid. And you need them to do that. You have to have hydrochloric acid to happen in your stomach. It's going to kill off bacteria. It's going to activate pepsinogen, and which allows you to start digesting food. You gotta have it. But you know where you don't want those cells? In your eyeballs. You get hydrochloric acid in your eyes, you'll go blind. So if you have cells in your eyes, if they start producing hydrochloric acid, you're in trouble, right? So your body has mechanisms of turning on genes in some cells and turning off genes in others. Okay? It's called epigenetics. It's your body's mechanism for controlling things. You don't want all cells making all genes at the same time. There are types of tumors where this kind of stuff happens. You can get, people have had tumors that like inside it's producing hair and teeth and like, it's like, oh, it's crazy. I forget, all of a sudden I can't remember the name of the tumor type. It'll probably come to me in a little bit and I'll tell you to go Google it and you'll like want to vomit when you see one if you were to Google it. What's happening in those cells is the epigenetics are going haywire and they're just making whatever they want to make. But, you know, you don't want to be producing like pubic hair on your nose or something, right? That's no way to get a wife, right? You don't want to be making teeth on your knuckles. You don't want to be, you want certain cells to be highly, highly specialized. That's what makes you you, right? This amazing multicellular organism with different cells and tissues and organs and organ systems. And they're all specialized even though they all have the exact same DNA. But at some level, all your cells have to be able to do everything. They have to be able to become anything. And that's what we call a germ cell. So a germ cell cells can become anything. Back when you were a little zygote, when there was an egg that met a sperm and fell in love and made a zygote, and you weren't a baby yet, you were one cell big. Well, now you're trillions of cell big, right? That one cell had to have the capacity to become everything that you are. That cell was completely indeterminate. And then that one cell became 2, and 2 became 4, and 4 became 8, and pretty quickly you became something called a blastula. We'll get to that later. And then that blastula started to take shape. So a blastula, you were looking something like this. Here's your one cell. It became 2. By the way, these things just divide without growing at this stage. 1 became 2, became 4. You know, we got like 16, and we got 32, and you look like a basketball, and you're not very big. But then, really quickly, this tube forms. And so if you were to look at you, this stage, you've got a tube, and that tube is still here today. Here's one end, there's the other. And that formed within hours. And they were determined. One end was going to be a mouth, and one end was going to be an anus. And everything else formed around it. I mean, literally, there's literally a tube running through you, right? I mean, from mouth to esophagus to stomach to small intestine, large intestine, like, and so everything formed around that and had to. And if that doesn't work out right, you don't make it, right? You're just a miscarriage. So very early on, you have determinate growth. The things at one end are going to have the capacity to make saliva and to make certain enzymes, and the ones in the middle are going to have the capacity to make hydrochloric acid and all these other enzymes. The others are going to become really specialized in absorbing. But at this phase, anything can become anything. I could pop a cell out of there and it can make a new one, and it can become anything. And this other cell can become anything. And watch this, watch, look up. If at the early stage, I do this, and I cut them in half, they're all germ cells. They all can become anything, and I just divided them from themselves. What would I just make?
Twins.
Identical twins. That's pretty cool, right? So these are germ cells. They're indeterminate growth. Epigenetics is not happening much. Genes haven't been turned on and off yet. Anything can become anything, including a whole other you. This is the holy grail of where modern science is wanting to go. Oh, if we could get your germ cells, or that of your child, or something like that, then, if you had kidney failure, we could just grow you a kidney. Right now, we can't just grow you a kidney, because all these other genes are shut off. It's not possible. So all that is really good, and you do want to know all that. Although you seem really bored, and I wish you weren't, because to me this is just crazy exciting stuff. But the plant equivalent of this is this. Up here, it can become xylem, it can become phloem, it can become, it can do photosynthesis, it can make leaves, it can make stems, it can make roots, it can make anything. It's really, really cool. And so these are at the tips of all these stems. If I want a plant to stop growing tall, I top it. I cut that off. Okay? And now it'll start to grow this way. Now it's going to have multiple, just because I cut the top off. If I cut the end off of every branch, that doesn't mean a tree stops growing, right? It just starts growing from somewhere else. Because you got branches off your branches, don't you? Twigs or whatever. Every on your plants, you'll get these nodules. Where there was a leaf one year, right, and then it dies. The next year you're going to have a branch. It's going to start to grow this way, and it's going to produce another. That's because there was a little meristem right there. At every node you have a meristem, and so it can produce another. So if I want to stop it that way, I got to cut that thing off. All right. That was a deep dive into the function of vascular tissue. Not as deep as it could have been, but pretty deep. New xylem is produced to the inside, new phloem is produced to the outside. It's made in the vascular cambium, right? One layer per year, right? Where will I find the oldest phloem? Phloem.
No.
The outside. Where will I find the oldest xylem? The very inside, right? The oldest is always being pushed out on both ends, okay? And that can only happen because of this vascular cambium being in the middle. It's right on the edge of the xylem and right on the edge of the phloem. So this is how we're growing this way, right? To grow this way, we're looking at an apical meristem, right? These are undifferentiated cells that can become absolutely anything. And that is just cool. They're analogous to our germ cells that can become absolutely anything, including a whole new person. Okay, and we haven't even talked about this yet. Where are we at on time? You need all this. This is all good. You need all of it. Did you get all this drawn? Okay. All right. I'm going to erase all this. Topic of blastula and all that, that's going to come back, okay? When we get to animals, it'll be there pretty quickly. It's important stuff. Goodness. Okay. We were talking about vascular. Now we're talking about seeds versus seedless. These guys didn't have seeds. These guys didn't have seeds. Right? What's the best they had?
Spores.
Spores. Okay. These guys still have spores. These guys still have spores, but they have seeds, and seeds are better. And what's better than just having a seed?
And the fruits.
Having a seed in fruit. Right? Helps with protection, helps with seed dispersal, helps with fertilization, helps with all kinds of stuff. So in many, many ways, these guys are the pinnacle of plants. All right. What was the characteristic over here that you had to them? Dominant? All right. Dominant gametophyte generation. Start to change over here, right? Dominant sporophyte generation. What do I mean by gametophyte and sporophyte? What does a gametophyte make? Gametes. What does a sporophyte make? Spores. It's in the name. Gametophytes make gametes. Sporophytes make spores. A gamete, is it unicellular or multicellular? Unicellular. Your gametes are unicellular, either an egg or a sperm, same to them. A sporophyte, unicellular or multicellular? No, a spore.
A spore, unicellular.
Spore is also unicellular. So this is true on both ends of this, right? Whether I'm talking about mosses or whether I'm talking about daylilies. The gamete is always unicellular, the spore is always unicellular. The gametophyte, though, is always
Unicellular.
multicellular.
Gametophyte?
The gametophyte, yes. The gamete is unicellular, the gametophyte is multicellular. The sporophyte is multicellular. Go ahead,
Okay.
process it, ask me
Yes,
questions. So let's think about what you had with your mosses, okay? You had this little thing, right? This was your gametophyte. It was haploid, multicellular. And it either produced sperm, or if you had an archegonium, again, it was one end, multicellular, and it produced an egg. And then the sperm swam to the egg and fertilized it, made a zygote. And then that zygote quickly grew up into a multicellular 2N sporophyte.
I was thinking about the genetic information of the cells.
Okay,
That's why I was confused again about that.
fair enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, so now they're drawing that like you haven't seen it before. Do me a favor, stop drawing for a second. The thing to connect is what they have that's so unique is this gametophyte. It's multicellular and it's haploid. You don't have anything, animals don't have anything like this. The only haploid cells you have are unicellular, right? Eggs or sperm. Every other aspect of an animal life cycle is diploid, okay? We don't have a box. There's no human gametophyte. This little sperm-making haploid dude running around. That does not happen in humans. That happens in mosses. It doesn't run around, but you know what I mean. It happens in a pine tree, but it's tiny, and we'll see that in a minute. What we do both have is a multicellular diploid phase. For them, it's called a sporophyte. For you, it's just called your body, right? So their life cycle is way more complicated than yours. It's very unique among God's creation. It's worth understanding, and especially since you're getting graded on it. So here, for most of the life cycle, the biggest part of it is the gametophyte. The sperm swims to the egg and it makes a sporophyte, grows up real quick, goes through meiosis, makes spores, which are haploid. They disperse, they're unicellular, and then they make more gametophytes. That's what happens in mosses. It's very, very different in gymnosperms and angiosperms. We have a reduced gametophyte generation. It gets smaller and smaller as we move this way, right? In the ferns, you still had a multicellular gametophyte. It was small. You would almost never notice it. In fact, I don't know that you could or would, notice it. When you think of a fern, you see this, right? It's got the fiddleheads and it's got all the things everywhere. This is big multicellular diploid, right? So multicellular diploid, what is it? What's it called? What phase of its life cycle? That's a sporophyte, okay? You see multicellular diploid, that's a sporophyte. You see multicellular haploid, that's a gametophyte. A sporophyte makes, say it, spores. A gametophyte makes gametes. Okay. All right. The haploid, multicellular haploid phase of these guys, remember, looked like a heart with some strings hanging down, and that was a truly multicellular 1N phase, and this is called a multicellular haploid, looks like a heart, has strings. What's it called? It's multicellular haploid. What's that called? What phase of its life? It's got to be the gametophyte. I drew your attention back to these two things to show you. Here, gametophyte is the dominant form. Here, it's still visible to the naked eye, but it's getting smaller. Huh?
Camel?
The Gametophyte.
Oh.
Is that what you meant?
No.
Okay. In a moss, it's the biggest phase. In a fern, it's reduced, but it's still visible to the naked eye. By the time we get to a pine cone, you can't see it. It's there, but you can't see it. Okay? All right. So let's, I'd like to show you a video. some things that hopefully we caught from that. I tell you what, you at least have to learn what my little boy learned 2 nights ago. He had his first talk about sex. It had nothing to do with people. Because we were out on the new property, and we have many pine trees, and down below he had all these little male cones. And they're like, what are those? And I was like, well, those are the male cones. And then these are the female cones. And he goes, well, why do they need male cones? What was my answer?
Producing new ones.
What do the male cones make that the female cones need?
Oh.
Sperm. And that was his first introduction to sex. He has no idea what's going on, but he's set. So anyway, so on a pine tree, you have 2 kinds of cones, right? You have these little tiny ones. If we were to go outside and find one, these are all over the place, and these produce sperm, right? And then you have female pine cones, and they kind of look like this. Right? And each one of these has a little pore. All right. So, let you guys catch up. Where's your book? Okay. Inside here you have microspores. Okay, this is all part of the sporophyte generation. Probably got some pine needles and stuff. Yeah. Okay. And these happen in clusters, by the way, usually. If you've ever been to one, but there'll be a bunch of these. There might be 10 or 12, I can't remember the exact number. But these microspores, right, it's part of the sporophyte generation. What does a sporophyte make? Spores, so it's going to make the spore. The spore is going to be haploid. This thing was diploid, right? So to go from a 2-inch sporophyte to a microspore, I have to go through meiosis. Okay? Then microspores, a spore always gives rise to a gametophyte, right? A multicellular haploid, and that's what's happening with our pollen, right? So the microspores produce a 1N multicellular pollen. Pollen is the gametophyte. What do gametophytes make? Gametes. So the microspore goes, the sporophyte goes through meiosis to make the microspores. The microspores go through mitosis to produce multicellular haploid pollen granules, right? This is the gametophyte phase. It's tiny, right? It's teeny, teeny, tiny. When it lands and inside of here, it's gonna make sperm, right? To go from a multicellular 1N to a unicellular 1N, all I have to do is do mitosis. Right? This is unicellular 1N. is my gamete. When the pollen comes in contact with this pore, it begins to digest its way through, it fertilizes an ovule, right? When I put two gametes together, what do they make? Starts with the Z, zygote. And that zygote is unicellular at first, but then it's going to grow through mitosis to become a diploid sporophyte. We call it a seed. Right? All right. We will probably come back to this and draw this later. All right. By the way, have you ever heard of Fibonacci numbers? Fibonacci sequence? No? You have? I'm not asking if you know it, but have you heard it? Okay. Let's talk about this for one second. This has, I mean, I'm not saying you have to know this isn't critical, but it is fascinating. We're at a Christian school, talking about the order and the mind of wisdom of God in all of creation. Fibonacci sequence. So the thing of a Fibonacci sequence is you add the last two numbers to get the next one. So you start with, what is it, 0 and 1, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 5, and 8, and 13, and 21, and 34, and 55, and 89, and then, you know, it just keeps going like this. You take the last two numbers, add them together, and that gives you the next number. We see this all over creation, including in the scales of the pine cone. If you recount the pine cone scales as they move out, you'll find that the first round has 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34, 55, 89. Every time. It's incredibly cool. So, just fun fact that takes about 2 seconds to think about. And this happens all over nature. You know, this guy just observed this in nature. It was like, whoa, that's cool. Okay. How are we doing on time?
Like 10 minutes.
Yeah, about 10 minutes. We are sure not going into angiosperms today. So these are what we call gymnosperms. Gymno means naked. Sperm means seed. Naked seed. Because once these pine cones release the seed, there's nothing covering them, there's nothing protecting them. Whereas like an angiosperm makes them in a flower. And that flower actually, you know that flower becomes the fruit? You ever think about that? Think about an apple. One end of the apple is a stem, right? What's on the other end? That little hard, weird part, right? A little teeny tiny. That's the flower. That's where the petals were. That's where the, you know, if you think of a typical flower, I don't know, let's do, what are they called? Tropical ones. Oh goodness, my mom knows them. Hibiscus. They're great because they show everything. Hibiscus can have something like this. By the way, you're going to be able to draw all of this very well coming up. Okay, so you think about a flower. This is a stamen, anther, and filament. The filament is where my pollen is going to be produced. This is called a pistil, stigma, style, ovary. What's in an ovary?
And
Eggs. Okay, so the pollen lands on the stigma, travels down the style, reaches an egg, fertilizes it. It's going to become a zygote. It's going to become a seed. What are seeds in?
fruits
Fruits. But where's my seed?
inside the
Stigma, style. What is this? Ovary. That's where ladies keep their eggs, right? When you eat a fruit, you're eating an engorged ovary. Yeah, fun fact. So this, as it grows, this gets, I said engorges, it gets huge, right? And so if this were an apple, what happens is, here's your stem, right? And here's your apple forming. And all the rest of this is, is kind of still there. But it just, kind of dies. What is that? So the rest of this becomes this. Here's my engorged ovary with my seeds. Here's my stem. Yeah, there you go. Why was I talking about that? Gymnosperm versus angiosperm. Flowering plants store their seeds in the flower itself, but that flower changes over time. The ovary engorges, it gets bigger. This protects those seeds. It helps to distribute those seeds. It'll help fertilize those seeds. Provides many, many advantages. Gymnosperm is naked seed. Do you think you have to know that? Yeah. Angiosperm means flower seed. Any questions for me? That's all I got. We'll pick up next time. We'll review this and we'll catch